Oh, okay, I'm guessing that's recording. Okay, hello everyone, welcome to EDFGC5810. This week I'm going to separate the recordings into two different recordings. The first one will probably be a little bit shorter, or maybe they'll be about the same time. Anyway, the first one is looking at gathering data and the second one is looking at interpreting data, and I just think it's going to be too long a recording if I have them both together, but obviously they connect. So first of all, because shortly you'll be going up, or in the next few weeks you'll be pacing your study by yourself. You'll be out on placements, a number of you, and I'm just wondering, I'm assuming actually that the external students are also on placement. Maybe that's a wrong assumption. Anyway, that, as you would have seen in the schedule, the next few weeks is where you just share your thinking and you share your progress on some blogs. These are the learning outcomes for this subject, and I just wanting to kind of highlight them to you. And if there are aspects in this that you think, oh, okay, I'm really not sure about that yet, please let me know. You can put a posting up on the general forum, and I'll make sure that I try to address it if there's anything that you feel there's a gap. If there are some things that you find, yeah, I'm getting this. This is really a big thumbs up, then same thing, let me know what has really worked for you. So it's a chance for you to give me some feedback. I can inform if there are any things that you need to have addressed before you set up with your last assignment. Now, I should have your papers marked by Monday. I was hoping to have them done this week, but it's just been crazy. So I will have to do them on the weekend, and all your results and the feedback will be uploaded on Monday. I do apologise, it's just been one of those crazy weeks. Anyway, so I just wanted to touch on that before. Now, today's learning intention, and this goes for both recordings, connect with the idea of research principles and methodology, which connects to methods and analysis. And we're going to engage in some very basic qualitative and quantitative analysis. I have put up a worksheet for you on Moodle that you can use. So we'll kind of get to those exercises throughout the slides, and it's actually a combination of both recordings, so just use the file and work your way through it. And you can post that on the forum page as well. So first of all, a little revisit. In your proposal, when you're explaining your methods, and I've shown you this slide before, I'm sure, because I quite like it, the whole idea is that you're justifying how you're going to use each method of data collection, and similarly each way of analysing your data. And just like when you're in the kitchen cooking, you're not just going to grab any utensil you find. You're going to grab a utensil that's there for a purpose because it helps you prepare your meal. Well, it's the same thing with your data, what things that you collect as part of data. So you need to think about, in respect to your question, because it always constantly comes back to that, just like the kitchen utensils relate to what you're cooking. So think about, in respect to your question, what constitutes data? What is it that you would actually need to collect in order to answer your question? In what ways can you gather that, whether it's qualitative or quantitative? What kind of processes will you actually engage with as you prepare? At the moment you're in the stage of preparing, and later on, if you take subject B, you will actually gather the data, and what kind of processes are involved in that. All these are considerations that you're actually touching on in your proposal, because the proposal is an exercise in you nutting out, if you like, the practical details of how you're actually going to investigate your issue and how you're going to gain some insight. I did have that as a pass the parcel thing in, actually, I'll just get back. Rather than pass the parcel, what I want you to do is go on your first, let me just minimize this, your first exercise sheet, and I actually want you to just rack your brain for the different, give yourself 2 minutes and identify as many instruments methods to collect data as you can within minimal risk confines. So you've got the qualitative and the quantitative. Just take a moment. Now those numbers, the things that you come up with might not match. I've just put in a generic table there. So just to kind of give yourself a refresher, do that first. You can pause the recording while you're doing it, because I'm going to keep on talking. Oh, hang on, shouldn't I press that? I should press this. Okay, from current slide. So I'm just going to go through some of these things. Now, a lot of these I've talked to, so I'm not going to dwell all that much, but I'm assuming that you've done that little table now. Your identification might have included things like observations, and that could be both for, it could be in a quantitative aspect that you're tallying, or it can be in a qualitative and more sort of field note approach. Interviews, again, keeping in mind that you can only interview teachers, and if you're going to have a chat with kids, you cannot do it as a formal interview. Written accounts, daybooks, artifacts. Artifacts could be anything from photos you see in the classroom, drawings, posters, school policies, school website, photos that the kids take. It could be, it's broad, it's open. Daybooks, if I didn't say that already. Now, if we do observations, the idea is obviously that you record what you see or what you hear in a particular setting. And it is important that it might be non-verbal as well. If you're using a structured approach, you are looking for specific behaviours. And often it means that you can certainly not be teaching at the same time, because you're going to be really distracted. So it's a consideration to put forward if that's what you're proposing to use as a data collection method. So a structured observation would be that you're looking for particular behaviours and nothing but, whereas if it's a semi-structured or an unstructured, you might have certain ideas, if you like, or certain things that you're looking for, but you can certainly add to that list. So it's a lot more free-flowing, if you like. Often we record those as field notes, and you've got an example here of some field notes from a book by Craig Mertler, who's an action researcher from the USA. You can see that there is a time indication, so we know when these observations occur. And in the first column that just says observations, it's literally kind of a blow-by-blow account. Whereas then there's like the benefit of hindsight. It's the observer's comments, which has an element of interpretation in it. So that would not have been filled out at the same time. It's just a way of processing the field notes. So it's an example you can see. Interviews, now they might be structured interviews with predetermined questions that are asked at a particular order. That would probably, you might use that approach if you're looking for a bigger sample, or if there's a particular reason why you want the questions to be answered in a particular order. Again, these are things that you would justify and just explain. You might instead use a semi-structured interview format, which means that you will have some base questions. You will have a little list of things that you're probably going to ask, but you're having a normal conversation, which is probably recorded with the teachers because you're concentrating on just having a chat with them. And they might bring up some of the things that you were going to ask them, and that's fine. You just keep talking. There might be other follow-on questions that you ask that obviously relate to your research and what you're talking about. But it's looser. You're a little bit more flexible, or quite a lot more flexible actually, in a semi-structured interview. The key though, or the thing to keep in mind, is that you don't want to go off on lots of tangents. You want to make sure that you're actually talking about what it is that you're seeking to explore, so that you don't waste anyone's time just, I don't know, chatting about the weather or something, rather than what you're actually seeking to research. You got a sample here again from Mertler of what a semi-structured interview might look. So you've got the semi-structured interview guide, and then you've got a small snippet of a transcript of how it actually looked. Written accounts, daybooks, your own journal. You might be blogging. It's a good idea actually, particularly as a qualitative researcher, to keep note of your thinking as you're conducting the research, and that will actually probably give you really valuable insight in respect to your research question. Student workbooks could be newspapers, newsletters, etc. And as I've said before, sorry, I'm going a bit crazy. Classroom artifacts is basically any written or visual sources of data. Now, in your proposal, if you're proposing to use classroom artifacts, say what they are and why and how they help you research, how they help you answer your question, rather than go for something broad that we don't know what it is. The other side of the spectrum, a quantitative focus, has a numerical focus. So it's anything that can be counted, tallied, or rated. We might use surveys for this. We might use set questions or statements. So it's kind of like a verbal survey sometimes. But there wouldn't be open questions generally. Generally, there would be set questions that they respond to, unless there's an open question and we tally or kind of work out the percentage in respect to a response. So if I asked you, what did you do on the weekend? I won't know what your answers are, but based on your responses, I could do a numerical analysis. I could say that 57% of the 23 students who were asked what they did on the weekend were mowing the lawn or something. Open and, oh, well, I just said that. Okay, so the other approach to that is a Likert scale, which you see often. In fact, your evaluate, I think, is that you do of your subjects as part of FedUni are probably a Likert scale. It's essentially a graded scale to which gives you a scale that you disagree or agree with statements. Checklists can be another thing where you tally what you see. So you've got an example here of a Likert scale, which goes from strongly disagree to, so it's a 5-point scale, to strongly agree, and you've got the same, so a 5 will constantly mean strongly agree for all these statements. That's another version of it. One thing I would, personally, I think this is a really poorly constructed survey, because if you're assuming that the kids can't kind of rate it, you're actually still presumably assuming that they either have someone read this question to them or find out, but there's still a gap in between there. So yeah, anyway, it's there as an example. It doesn't actually always have to be 1 to 5. It can be pictures as well. One thing, or not just one thing, quite a few things to keep in mind though, if you are constructing a survey, and these are again considerations that you would put forward in your proposal. And I should say that if you're suggesting that you will be using either interviews or surveys, you need to provide some sample questions, and that's actually part of what you need to include in your ethics appendix as well, with some of the considerations for the bulk thing. So you need to include some of the things that you would ask and explain how that's going to help you. Okay, so in a survey, each item on that survey needs to have a single idea or concept. You cannot have double-barreled questions because there's no way you can answer them. There's only one idea you can respond to for each item. You need to keep it short and sweet, regardless of whether you're proposing to survey students or teachers, because everyone's pretty time poor and you don't want to answer 50 million questions. I know someone who was finding it really difficult to get response rates from teachers, and they had like 72 items on their questionnaire. Well, people are not going to fill that out. If you're using a rating scale like the 1 to 5, you need to make sure that the scale is consistent throughout the survey. It doesn't mean that you cannot invert the question. Sometimes you do that for a reason, and you actually, in respect to the weighing, you would expect that a strongly negative answer would be, if you like, the equivalent of, a strong agreement. And you use that to anchor questions to see that people really hold that opinion. So you don't just ask it once. Often you have a few, if it's a really important thing, you asking it maybe in a few different ways. You would, in all likelihood, when you filled out a survey, you will find, they've already asked me that. You have that realization. That's because they're anchoring the item. They're making sure that they're actually getting a valid reading of what your thinking is. However, you cannot all of a sudden say that a 1 means something different in the scale. That's why the response scale needs to be consistent. Hopefully that makes sense. I think it probably will if you think about it. Don't use leading questions. Important. Proofread your survey, not just because it's slightly embarrassing to have a typo or something, but if it doesn't make sense, your data, you're not going to really be able to use it. It's not going to give you any meaningful results, and you don't want to do that to yourself. So get someone to have a read through. Make sure that the questions are clear. There might just be wording. There might be words in your questions that people might not understand. Otherwise, it's always good to get that feedback. If you're using a checklist, keep in mind that it's whether you're looking at behaviors or characteristics or skills, whatever it is, it will just be things that you can see. And you can only see whether they're there or not. You cannot actually see to what degree they're happening. You could see possibly, you could get an understanding of that based on how frequently they occur by tallying it, but you don't know to what depth, if you like. So something to consider, and again, something you would probably include in your explanation of what you're doing. It's really easy to use, but you need to keep the behaviors or the characteristics really manageable, because otherwise you're going to drop the ball, if you like. You're not going to see all those things. So whatever it is, that's really important that you're looking at. And in fact, I put up a video clip because in the face-to-face we talked about this as an example. We spoke about it in respect to students' self-efficacy, or their belief in their ability to complete tasks. I think that was what we were talking about. Anyway, and the idea was that you would try to observe what students did and to what degree they persisted with tasks. That would be a behavior you could see, and to what degree they might attempt challenging questions. And in response to that, I've put up a video clip from Schools World, which is looking at peer-to-peer feedback, but it's given as a maths example. And you can see how you might use something similar to see whether certain behaviours manifest. So you could use it in respect to developing a checklist around what you'd see. Anyway, you got an example here. Personally, I think this is a pretty poor checklist. I'm just using it there because it's clear whether it's observed or not observed. But if you look at the different traits there, chooses appropriate books, well, okay, possibly you could see that. Stay focused on task is quite difficult to judge because someone might be thinking about something else. You don't know that. Thinks about the story. How on earth would you know that? You know, I might be looking like that, and you might think I think about the story, but actually I'm thinking about what's on television tonight. So some of those are a bit dubious, but anyway. We spoke about observation schedules last week, so I'll leave that. I'm just keeping there as an example of contextualizing it, and that particular example was done in combination with tallies of particular behaviors. You might also use test scores, or it could be time spent on task to generate a score as well if you want. Often we do that as a pre-test, post-test design, and in one of the exercises we're going to do when I do the second recording connects with that. You do need to keep in mind some validity and reliability considerations, particularly, and this is what, well, it says quantitative there, but actually you might keep that in mind for qualitative as well. Does the data measure what you actually intend it to? Important consideration. Is it consistent, and are the results repeated? Now, it is actually possible to have an instrument and obtain results that are reliable, i.e. consistent, but not valid, which is then a bit of a waste of time. So keep that in mind, and that's again why you need to explain for every single method that you're proposing to use. You actually need to explain how it will help you answer your question, and that's a validity consideration. Now, again, this is on your worksheet, and this is the last thing I want you to do before I start the next recording. keep your research question at the forefront of your mind. In fact, you might even want to write it down there. And then tick off the methods that you think will be appropriate for you to collect data. You've also got other there, so you can add other ones that you might use. Any comments? Explain why. Might be, how does it help you answer your question? So that's the next thing you're going to do while I stop this and start my next recording.